Hello and welcome to episode 22 of 50 Women Over 50, a podcast for women whose personal confidence is born of experience. I'm your host, Sherrilynne Starkie. My goal is to interview 50 women from all walks of life who are over 50 years of age about what they've learned by this decade so that we can all learn from them too. Today, I'm welcoming to the show Anne Douglas, who has for decades been Canada's go-to expert on all things parenting as the best-selling author of 25 nonfiction books. But her newest book is the reason why I invited her on my podcast. It's called Navigating the Messy Middle, a fiercely honest and wildly encouraging guide for midlife women. It's true that she has literally written the book on middle-aged women, and she has a lot of wisdom to share. So tell me about your 50th birthday.
What's funny is it happened so long ago, I actually had to rely on the fact that I'm a digital pack rat to figure out what the heck I had done around my 50th. So I searched, right? And apparently a couple of good friends took me out for birthday lunches that week. And one of my kids came home and we had like a birthday dinner on the actual night. In the spring afterwards, we had a family reunion in a hotel in Kingston where we celebrated my birthday, my husband's birthday, and our daughter's 25th. So there was a lot of celebrating happening. And at some point, I can't find this one on the calendar. I know there was some kind of sisternet celebration. I'm the oldest of 4 girls.
Okay.
So we call ourselves sisternet. And we did do something. I have a vague memory that it might have been at like a restaurant in Toronto, but I'm not sure if I'm mixing that up with another sisternet event.
Okay. But as you were leading up into your 50s then, like, did you not see it as a major milestone? Like, I'm just wondering why you can't even really remember it.
I think it's because my life was a little bit of a hurricane at that point. I mean, I was dealing with all kinds of mental health and physical health challenges, and my kids were struggling in various ways, and the wheels were coming off the bus in my marriage for a while. It was not a great time. And so I think it wasn't until I was 49, I even thought about the fact that I was like heading into midlife, which we know midlife is not magically your 50th birthday. But that was when the light bulb went off for me. And I thought, wait a minute, I should start taking some of this health stuff seriously. So I think the only thing I really did was to actually realize that you can't just treat sleep as optional and not eat well and never exercise and expect you're going to be super healthy. I mean, you might win the lottery and that might play out that way or not. And I just felt like, given that my mother had died at a fairly young age at 63, that I needed to pay attention to the fact that I was inching in on that territory.
Right. So you started making some healthy lifestyle choices.
Totally. I mean, I started walking for the first time since gym class in public school, basically.
Oh, okay.
I had been professionally sedentary for many years.
I see. And you went with walking. So I went with running. So they were doing like 5K run here, and I live in Manotick, which is just south of Ottawa. And so my daughter wanted to sign up, and she said, "You come with me, Mom, and we can train together." And I was like, I really don't want to do this. Now, next thing I know, I'm signed up for this run. I've never run in my life. And guess what? Nobody trained but me. So I didn't even get my like mommy-daughter time or anything. But anyways, I did keep it up for a while after that. I did the 5K the first year, and then I did 5 miles, and then I did 10 miles. And I was signed up for another 5-mile run when the pandemic hit. And then I was like, oh, thank God, I don't have to run anymore. There's a pandemic.
That's hilarious. I've only ever done one 5K event, and it was a walking one, which was totally fine with me. And it was very relaxed. It's like, if you want to take a break, take a break. And so, yeah, I thought that's my style.
You mentioned something about sleeping. So was that an issue for you?
Yes, but I just feel like every once in a while, something goes awry with sleep. I don't quite know what it is, but when my sleep isn't great, everything else falls apart. This is one thing I figured out. I live with a chronic illness called Meniere's disease, and it's a balance and dizziness disorder. And you have to like work really hard at managing your triggers. And for me, sleep deprivation is a big thing. And that's why the queasiness is like hitting in a low level way. And I've learned over the years, don't panic. just take it almost like your battery's getting low on your phone. You go plug it in when it says like 17% or something. You don't wait till it's at 1%.
Right.
So yeah, so just I think that's part of the great thing about getting to this age, right? Like you've tried things, you've figured out that no, I can't actually get along for indefinite periods of time with very little sleep or just surviving on like drive-through takeout and calling that nutrition and all those things. Like some of that catches up with you and you realize like it's just not worth it. Like I went through, I would say about a 10-year period where I was basically working way too hard, fueling myself with caffeine during the day, unwinding in the evening with wine, waking up in the middle of the night because wine is great for getting to sleep, but not staying asleep.
Yep.
And then getting up the next morning exhausted and repeating that over and over again for a period of years until I literally felt like I was getting completely depleted. I remember having a conversation with my family doctor saying, I feel like I'm on a treadmill and I can't get off. And it's not even the right kind of treadmill. It's not like the healthy kind. It's the, you're going to go flying against the back wall of the building because you haven't ever taken care of yourself.
And so your sleep situation was related, or was that part of it?
Oh, it's probably one of the many factors. And I mean, I am a very anxious person. I have been diagnosed with bipolar disorder, not like where it's like a big issue for me day to day, but I am so good at anxiety. If I'm worried about something, it's like top of mind. So I think it's just like these moving parts. And I mean, the last couple of years have been really, really hard for everybody, right? So I think that a lot of us haven't processed some of that low level anxiety that just became the backdrop to daily living. I almost feel like we should be going to like a group retreat in the woods, all of us, and just getting back in balance in some way, which sounds very woo-woo, but I do find nature very calming. And I think that's why taking a couple of walks a day is a big thing for me.
Yeah. The whole idea of a retreat in the woods sounds pretty awesome to me right now. But I'd like to drill down a little bit more about this, I don't know, a wall that you hit or a deadline that you hit where you were just like, this is it. I've got to start taking my health more seriously. And so was there anything else that surprised you when you were in your 50s about just things you didn't suspect life was going to be like?
Yeah, well, I think on a more positive thing, I think I was really surprised by how much learning and growing I would still be doing at this age. Like this even came through when I was having conversations with some of the women I interviewed for my book. Like they said, I thought by now I would have it all figured out, or I thought I'd be coasting career-wise. In my 50s, I learned how to edit audio for community radio in my town. And that led me to doing regular audio work for the CBC for a while. And then I started doing a lot of speaking related to my books. And I mean, like, I am a card-carrying introvert. So I have done a lot of like personal growth stuff. And my latest thing is I decided a couple of years ago that I'm done writing nonfiction books. Like I've said everything I want to say, but I really want to write a novel. So I'm about 18 months into trying to teach myself how to write a novel. I got really serious about it last summer and applied to this Story Studio Chicago Novel in a Year program. So I'm being mentored by Rebecca Mackay, who's like a fabulously successful novelist. There's a cohort of 16 of us. And like we're literally living and breathing novels all the time. So it's like, it is amazing. I feel like when I was 12 years old, if you'd asked me, what would your dream life be? It would be like living in nature, reading and writing books. And so what am I doing? I'm living in nature and I'm reading and writing books. I mean, oh my God, it's like,
congratulations.
Yeah, I'm really happy about that. And I mean, I think the best thing is like, if I had been trying to do this at 30, I would have been like completely flipped out. It would be like, what if I'm terrible at writing a novel? Well, of course you're going to be terrible when you first try to figure out how to write a novel. You're going to literally make every mistake in the book page by page until you figure out what doesn't work. And instead of thinking like I should be embarrassed, I should like hide my pages and throw them in the shredder. It's like, no, I should share them with other people in the class. And then they can point out like, we don't actually know whose head we're in right now. Like, is this like some entity that's all knowing, or is this actually the perspective of a particular person? So just giving myself permission to be in the newbie class of learning a new skill, it feels great. It's so exciting. It's so fun. And partly what's waking me up at 2:30 a.m., I think, because my brain keeps having ideas. It's like, you just have your idea at 6:30 in the morning.
No, that never happens. So that's really interesting, actually. And I kind of want to ask you a little bit more about that in the context of your recent book, Navigating the Messy Middle. Because what you're saying, I'm hearing it reflected in many of the calls that I've been making on this podcast project. And like, I don't remember my mom and my grandma having this kind of, it's almost like a renaissance in their 50s where they finally have the time and the money and the energy to do something that's interesting to me and not doing it for somebody else. And so in your research for your book, like, is this a new phenomena with our cohort, with the boomers and Gen X's as we are reaching middle age, or am I just too self-centered to have noticed what was going on in my mom's life?
I think it's probably a mix of both, because obviously I didn't really have a midlife role model in my mom because she died at 63. But I had two grandmas who lived into their 90s, and they got feistier, more outspoken. They did their own thing as they grew older. In fact, one of the last conversations I had with my grandma, she was just like giving out radical advice. It's like, go vote for this party that I never would have supported in the past. And if you want to live with your boyfriend, go live with your boyfriend. It's like, who is this person? This was not the party line for many decades. So,
yes.
So I think that we have, like, as a generation or a generation or two, because I realize you probably have the mix of like Gen X and boomer listeners, and hopefully much younger women as well. But I think that there has been that sense of, we make a lot of conscious decisions. Like, I mean, I obviously spent the bulk of my career writing about parenting, and like, people think really hard about parenting. So why would we not carry that I want to learn about human development kind of mindset into midlife as well? And like, there's just so much information out there. It can be really overwhelming, of course, if you look at every conflicting piece of data that's out there in the world. But I think there is that sense that you have confidence, you have a lot of self-knowledge. And so at this point in your life, you're saying, like, what works for me right now? What's reasonable and possible? What do I actually want? And maybe when you were younger, depending on your situation, you might have been so bogged down taking care of other people that you didn't even have the luxury of having that thought. So, and I mean, it's not like everybody's magically free and clear of responsibilities at midlife. For some women, it's like a really crushing time for like layers and layers of responsibility. I just feel like I have that little pocket of time right now where nobody, knock on wood, nobody's dealing with like a terrible illness or a catastrophe or any kind of messiness. So I guess that's something else we learn along the way, is seize the day. When you're going through one of those periods where things feel pretty great, don't just go, oh, yeah. No, savor it, make the most of it, enjoy it, because none of us know what is going to round the bend.
Well, what you say is true, though. I've seen this across the interviews. Like, I've interviewed one woman who's in her 50s. She has children still in their like early teens. I've interviewed other women with empty nests, and they're looking after their elders or siblings' responsibility and stuff. So yeah, you're right. It's not like the panacea. Oh, I'm 50. The kids have flown the coop and I'm free. It's not.
Not at all. Something I wonder about is whether, like, when I was a younger person and I was looking at people who are older, like, I remember very clearly when I was in grade 6, thinking that my teacher had to be ancient. And I've since done the math. And if I was 11 and she probably was 30, she might have been 41, but I probably had her pegged at 75. So you have a strange perspective when you look at other people's ages. So I think that we could maybe not have been picking up on all of the stuff. And I mean, we're much more open now, I think, than we were a generation ago. That's right. So if somebody was thinking about running off and doing something scandalous, they might not have shared it at the family reunion. Well, at least not at my family reunions. They were rather proper.
So thinking back, what were you doing when you were 30 years old?
I have this very clear memory of the time approaching my 30th birthday. I was a very earnest and serious person when I was younger. And I remember sitting in the hairdresser's chair, being on the verge of tears because I was about to turn 30 and I hadn't written my first book. So of course I completely wasted my entire life. You know, it was never going to happen. And why had I wasted my youth in such a shameful way? And so within a couple of years, I started writing books. And I mean, I went on to write 26 of them. So obviously that did work out in the end. But oh my goodness, I put so much pressure on myself when I was younger to achieve, to be perfect. Like if I could talk to younger me, I would just say, don't rush. Hopefully you have many years, no guarantees, but hopefully. And also, for goodness sakes, learn about self-compassion, because you would never be this mean to other people, but the demands you put on yourself, they're crushing and they're impossible. So stop it.
But you only learned that with experience.
Yeah, I didn't learn that until I was about 55. So you can see there was a slight lag in learning how not to really bully myself, which is a terrible way to go through life, with a really self-critical lens and constantly worrying about other people's expectations. It's not that I don't care what other people think. I mean, I really am a caring person and very connected to a lot of people, but I don't let it ruin my life. Like the other day I was Googling something, and you know how I was looking for a specific article about my book, and I happened to like Google it. And it came up with this library in Alberta where somebody hated my book and gave it a 5 out of 10 rating. And so younger me would have been like, why does that person in Alberta hate my book? Like, obviously I've missed some major fundamental flaw with the book. At my age now, 59, I can live with the fact that somebody in Alberta doesn't like my book. Because I don't like every book I read.
No, what you say is correct about the high standards that we hold to ourselves. My mother often says you can't put an old head on young shoulders. You have to live it until you learn it. And that's so true. You were reminding me of my 25th birthday. I wept because in my mind, I'm a total grown up now, right? I'm 25. I was a single mom with 2 babies and living in a 1-room apartment. It wasn't a happy time in my life. And I wept because I was like, look at the mess I've made of my life. And I've totally screwed it up and life is over. My girlfriends teasingly gave me sympathy cards for my birthday.
They were picking up on a vibe for sure, right?
Yeah. And I was like, oh, I haven't traveled. I haven't done it. Oh my God, I was so silly. Yes, I did get a chance to travel. That would be my advice to my 30-year-old self is understand you're not the center of the universe and you are not at the end of the line. That's for sure.
And you're not the first person to make a mistake, right? On those days when you forget something you were supposed to do. We've all had those moments. I'm thinking about a time, this probably would have been when I was in my, maybe around 40, I guess, maybe late 30s or around 40. And I was sitting in the hairdresser chair again. You're going to think all I do is go to the hairdresser. But here I was again with hair dye all over my head, and my cell phone rings. And I pick it up and my friend says, are you okay? Like, we're so worried you didn't show up. It's like, I didn't show up for what? The conference you're supposed to be speaking at today. Oh my goodness.
That's a big oversight.
I thought it was the next day, which was why I was getting my hair done so beautifully. But I had somehow put it on my calendar a day out of sync. And it was mortifying. Like, it was a terrible thing. But there's a way to live through even a big mistake like that. So, I gave everybody who was supposed to be attending my session a free copy of one of my books. And I wrote them a letter of apology because I felt like I had to say sorry for wasting their time. My friend was gracious. All the people who attended the conference were nice about it. And I lived, because that's always been one of my biggest fears. Like, what if I really make a big mistake and let people down and disappoint them? I mean, when you're a people pleaser, as I really was to the max, like that's like, you almost feel like you have to mentally resign from the human race. And because you're just like, obviously nobody's ever going to want to trust you again. But when I think of other people's mistakes along the way, I can be so much more gracious when that happens. Having lived through that experience myself, it's like, yeah, sometimes these things happen. You miss a plane, or your technology doesn't work, or something goes wrong, or you just aren't, your mortal human brain gets overloaded and you make a mistake. It happens to all of us. So whenever I have somebody really beating themselves up, I say, let me tell you about the conference. And it really cheers them up.
Yeah, gives them a little context. So tell me how you came to write your most recent book.
Yes, this was definitely one of those like midlife transitions. And I had been feeling for a while that as much as I loved writing about parenting and as much as I will always care deeply about parents and kids, I was no longer in the front lines of that, right? Like I just felt like I was losing my contact to know like, what is it like to be a parent right now? And so I recognized that I needed to start writing about something else. But the question was, what else? And so one day I got an email from my agent and she said, I know what your next book needs to be about. Can we get on the phone? It's like, of course, she's never done this before. I mean, I'm open to ideas. And she told me she really wanted me to write a book about midlife because she really needed to read a book about midlife written by me, which I took as a huge compliment.
Yes.
And this was all happening just right on the eve of the pandemic. And I think for me, it was actually a really fortunate thing for my little obsessive brain to have a project to work on during the pandemic. And it gave me an excuse to have conversations like the one we're having today with like 118 women. Like that was such a gift. And sometimes that was like almost the extent of my human contact during those intense months of lockdown, right?
Tell me how you found this 118 women.
This is pretty much the snowball effect where you start out and you have some people in mind. But as I started to do the interviews, people would say, I loved this process so much. And you really need to speak to my cousin, my old university roommate, etc. This is how I ended up going from intending to interview 50 women to like 118, right? Just because once I started hearing their stories, it's like, well, of course I want to hear more, learn more, and so on. And because every conversation was unique and I can still replay the highlights of some of those conversations in my mind. Like just this one woman talked a lot about what if we didn't fear aging, but we thought about it as like a process of progressive enrichment, like something that you grow into a more distilled and purer version of yourself. And like, wow, mind-blowing stuff. And so I think it was like a lot of thought-provoking conversations and then rounding that out by doing a lot of research. I think I read something like 1,000 journal articles and 100 books and had all these conversations. So like it literally was an all-consuming project for the couple of years when I was doing the research and writing. I literally was sprinting to meet each of the editorial deadlines along the way. Usually I feel like I have a little bit more breathing room, but obviously if you cram way too much into your research project, you're always going to be scrambling, right?
So I'm interested in the title of the book. Why messy?
Because midlife is anything but predictable. I find that there's a lot of narratives that say like midlife is supposed to be completely magical or midlife is completely miserable when the truth is really somewhere in the middle, the messy middle, right? So I actually had to fight long and hard for that title because the publisher was worried that some people might think it was negative, but I think it's real. And I am all about keeping it real, as you've probably noticed. I tend to be a rather forthright and honest person. And so that's the spirit I wanted to bring to the book, just like that there is no one-size-fits-all roadmap that guides you through midlife. And anybody who pretends there is exaggerating or selling you a bill of goods, right?
Just taking a second to take that in, because you're so right. Obviously, you're so right. But there are so many people out there that are trying to sell you these books, these online courses, these one-on-one coaching things that they're purporting to have the key to unlock the secrets. And what you're saying is there is no key, there is no lock, there are no secrets.
Yeah, I think the most valuable thing to me is always to compare notes with other people. And that's why I always take such a story-driven approach in my research, because it's like when you were dealing with a particular parenting challenge when your kids were younger, the best people to ask about what do you do when your kid is biting other kids are people whose children have been on like the giving or receiving end of the biting. So it's like that with midlife, like you're having problems with insomnia. Luckily, my sister and we have like a perpetual chat or text message loop that's been going for a couple of years. And it's like, if you're having like a weird thing, you can literally type in your question and somebody will have an answer for you. So I think it's that pooling of wisdom, the sense that you're not alone, and the sense that you're not doing midlife wrong if you haven't found like 7 sensational secrets to having the perfect midlife or whatever it is that you think you're supposed to know.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you're 100% right. But how has the book been received, like by the readers?
Yeah, I think that women who have read it have said that they found it very validating, that they could see themselves in some of the stories. I had a couple of people, including my beloved dad, say that they were like blown away by the amount of research. I mean, one of the best reviews I got was a lovely detailed email from my dad. So I feel like the other reviews will never matter quite as much. He's in his 90s and he's like a brilliant and inspiring and much loved human in my life. And like in terms of like some of the other reviews and stuff, I got one in anticipation of the US release, which is happening like at the end of March, from a website or a publication called Midwest Book Review. And they really highlighted the fact that it should be a resource for women's studies programs and so on, and just like really saw the value, because like you could just collect stories, but they have to be stories in context, right? You can't just sort of throw a smattering of things on the wall, or you have more like a collage effect as opposed to something that is trying to like synthesize some meaning. And even just when you talk about your process today, you're thinking back across all the conversations you've had so far, and you're carrying forward some threads that seem meaningful or significant, or like an interesting contrast. It's like a whole bunch of people said this and some other people said that. How interesting.
Mm-hmm.
So I felt like there was a lot of shaping involved, but I guess what I really wanted was to write a book that reflected what have I learned at this point in my life during my time on the planet. If this is my last book ever, what do I want to be able to pass on to my kids as they head into midlife? What would I want to say to my best friend? If, heaven forbid, a logging truck hit me tomorrow and I was no longer here, what values would I want to carry on in the world, like beyond my time here?
Mm-hmm.
Very much about self-compassion and about our interconnectedness and being like small p political together, tapping into our power as midlife women and looking for opportunities to really seize the opportunity to use our gifts in some way. I mean, like we have spent decades of our life accumulating wisdom and life experience. And some people would love to shove us off stage at this very moment when we're reaching our peak abilities. And that is not okay. I have so enjoyed seeing a major famous Canadian broadcaster asserting her right to be celebrated, because she deserves it and she's earned it.
You're talking about the story that broke this morning.
Yes.
Yes, I know. She's amazing. We're talking about Lise Laflamme.
Yeah.
Who is what happened last summer with her? Actually, it was part of what spurred me into this project, because I don't believe she got fired because her hair is gray. I think she got fired for a myriad of reasons, all of which we are exploring on this series of calls about. She's a deliberate woman, an emphatic woman, a woman who cared a lot, a woman who would not be told to sit down and be quiet. Yes, she let her hair go white. That's incidental. This is not why she lost her job. And I was really a little upset about that narrative going out, because it really undermined the significance of what happened there, I felt. I mean, would that she got fired because her hair went white, that would be terrible. But it was that plus a whole lot more.
Yeah, like I don't know if you read her interview with the New York Times a couple of weeks ago, but she very much made the case for there was a lot of stuff going on throughout my entire career. Mm-hmm. And just like the number of times that people tried to sideline or minimize her or silence her, I really want her to write a memoir. I think she could write like one powerful book, because everybody's paying attention and she has that platform.
And I would really like her to come on my podcast. So, Lisa, if you are listening, please come on my podcast, because I have questions.
Yes, that might even spur you to do episode 51.
Yeah, it might. It might, for sure. But what are you hopeful about then?
So I'm a naturally hopeful person, but sometimes I misplace my sense of hope. These past few years have been an exceptionally difficult time to be a caring, thinking person. So I guess I find hope in a couple of things. Writers and artists who are trying to imagine new worlds into being, activists who are trying to repair and reimagine the world that we have, and ordinary people with kind and caring hearts. I feel like there are all three layers in my hope sandwich, and I need them all to work together.
Is there anything I haven't asked you about that you'd like to share?
I think I would just make the point of how you sometimes have to really work at staying connected, how easy it is to really get disconnected in this life stage because you're busy, or as you said earlier, we're just coming out of a time where we couldn't be face to face for large blocks of time. So I think that you can't just expect community to happen. You have to make it happen.
This has been 50 Women Over 50, a podcast for women whose personal confidence is born of experience. I want to thank my guest, author Anne Douglas, for joining me today and sharing with us what she learned from interviewing 118 middle-aged women. I love what she said about how women our age have spent decades of our lives accumulating wisdom and life experience, and it's not okay that some people would like to shove us off stage at the very moment that we're reaching the peak of our abilities. I wanted to stand up and cheer when she said that, and I hope you did too. I invite you to see the show notes to find out more about Anne and her books. I've included links so that you can connect with her online. Join me again for next week's show when I will welcome Norma Dunning, an Inuk woman who at age 50 went back to school to get a degree. In 2021, she received a Governor General's Literary Award for her book, De'ena. That's next week. In the meantime, please drop me a rating or a review on Apple or wherever you get your podcasts. Let's connect and create a whole community of wise women over 50 by sharing a link to this show with your friends and connections. See you next time on 50 Women Over 50. I'm your host, Sherrilynne Starkie.